in order to analyze the risk for the people, we have to know the amount of becquerels per kilogram of food. Because if you know the amount of becquerel per kilogram and the amount of food that you eat, number of kilograms, you can calculate the number of becquerels that you have been ingesting and then convert it into a dose. So the first point is to know if with this kind of radiation meter we can or not detect the contamination of food samples. We saw that when the samples have a huge amount of contamination, like in this case 90,000 becquerels per kilogram, which you can compare to the limit in Japan, that is 500 becquerels per kilogram for cesium-137 for usual foodstuff like mushrooms. You see that you are able to detect that it is contaminated. But if you have a smaller contamination or a smaller amount of material, like in this case 30 grams, which have a big contamination, 5,000 becquerels per kilogram, which is 10 times above the limit of 500 becquerel per kilogram. In this case, we were not able to detect an excess of gamma radiation because the amount of material was too small and the amount of becquerel in this sample was too small. But if instead of 30 grams we measured 1 kilogram, we would very probably have been in a position to detect the contamination of the sample. That's why it's better to check samples, for example, on the marketplace, to check huge amounts of food. So even very small doses of radiation can have an health effect. Radiation can, on the long term, increase the risk of cancer, for example. So the best thing is not to eat any contaminated food. And that's why CRIIRAD is advising to the governments, to the people, to provide non-contaminated food to the citizens when it is possible. Because the limits which has been designed, like this limit of 500 becquerel per kilogram for cesium, which is used in Japan for a lot of food, it's quite an elevated limit. And if people were to eat this kind of food the whole year long, they would reach quite high doses. Now we are going to check the samples of mushrooms with the Radex. So we put the Radex as a tube here. When gamma radiation enters the tube, it creates a sort of electric discharge, and it will count this discharge. So the more you have gamma radiation entering the tube, the more elevated is the figure in microsievert per hour. So we have to put the meter with the tube. The tube is here. To put it with the tube in the middle of the sample and to say go on. And we will wait for a few minutes so that it finishes a good measurement. We cannot make a conclusion looking at the first results. For example, now we have 0.18 microsievert per hour. But it will change over time. We have to wait for a more precise measurement. Now we have 0.13 microsievert per hour, and he's still calculating the average value, so we have to wait for him. So now the second cycle is finished. First cycle, this sign, second one, and now we get a measurement of 0.1 microsievert per hour. But we still have to wait for the third and fourth part of the cycle. Each time we see a black sign means that a gamma radiation has been detected. And now the measurement is finished. We've got our 1, 2, 3, 4th cycle. It's finished, and we measure 0.11 microsievert per hour. And this is the background value in this place. So we detected no excess of radiation compared to the background value. The reason for that is that the amount of becquerels of cesium in this sample is quite small. It's only 160 becquerels because we have only 30 grams of sample. The global activity is quite high. It's 5,300 becquerels per kilogram, and the limit in Japan for food, general food, is 500 becquerels per kilogram. We saw that we were not able to detect the contamination of this sample, but in the case of Fukushima, you don't have only cesium-137. So if this sample was coming from Fukushima area, we would probably have more than 10 times more becquerels, because with 160 becquerels of cesium-137, we would also have becquerels of iodine-131, cesium-134, and others. And in this case, we probably would have been in a position to detect an excess of radiation and the fact that this sample is contaminated. So now we are going to check this sample with the Geiger-Müller counter Radex. So we have to think to put the tube on the sample, and we let him calculate. So the first figure we get is 0.24. It's 2 times above background, but we have to wait 2 to 4 minutes to be sure that he really measures something which is 2 or 3 times above background. So now, after a few seconds, he gets a new figure, which is 0.3 microsievert per hour, which is 3 times above background. The second cycle is finished. The new value is 0.32 microsievert per hour. We also note that the black sign is coming with the highest frequency than with the less contaminated sample. So we see that the amount of radiation which is getting out of the sample is highest. The third cycle is finished. The value is 0.33. We note that the 3 values measured after the 3 different cycles are quite coherent. And now the measurement is finished. We've got 4 signs of the square. The value now is 0.33 microsievert per hour, which is 3 times above the background value in this laboratory. So we see that this mushroom with only 30 grams is increasing the dose rate on contact of it by a factor of 3, which proves that there is a contamination inside him. We don't know if it is cesium or iodine or another radionuclides. To know that, we would have to put the sample in a gamma spectrometer. But at least we know that there is some radiation getting out of the sample.